Welcome back, guys. It's craziness of the internet here, and we are back today again with another factional warfare video in EVE Online. Today in factional warfare we'll be discussing the Caldari state, their close range application brawlers, and their long range kiters. Now the Caldari state is a unique faction in itself, as it's one of the main factions that focuses heavily on shield and application. Its E-war factors are things like jams so that you can break the enemy locks. It's understanding that the Caldari state is a king of application towards damage. You can then note to yourself that the Caldari becomes one of the best factions for controlling damage on the battlefield, as they can specifically choose what damage type to apply. Alright you guys, now the next destroyer that we are going to take a look at from the Caldari state is the Cormorant. Now this is one of the Caldari state's gun-based design destroyers, as the last one we just took a look at was a rocket and missile-based version. Now a fast way to look at the difference between those two when choosing which one you are going to go out with your friends and roam in is one is needed to acquire application for heavy applied damage, and this one utilizes tracking with application, still staying true to the state's main goal as a faction, and that is that they are the kings of controlling the battlefield when it comes to application and the range that they can choose to control. Now sometimes in the Caldari and other shield based module ships, we do need to find ways to reduce our power grid and especially our CPU when we are trying to add on in our low slot some modules that will increase your damage. So to be able to pull off things like this, we sometimes need to use two different group style of weapons. At least in my perspective and gameplay of EVE Online, this is something that I choose to do a lot and that I would encourage a lot of you to do as well. Yes, on a spreadsheet it will show you that you do lose DPS compared to other weapons such as the Electron Blaster 2 versus the Neutron Blaster 2, but each thing in EVE Online, including weapons, ships, and everything you can think of, you guys, is 100% situational, and no weapon or no module or no utility is better than the other, unless you are looking at, say, like an officer module or a dead space module to a specific module that's already preset to what the ship is best with. So for an example, what I can give to you guys is, yes, the Neutron Blaster 2 will pump out more damage over time, but the Electron Blaster will fire and track faster, so by reducing the DPS you are guaranteeing that you will get a hit on your smaller targets, and sometimes all we need is to just get those little extra hits in there. So to do this, you guys can see that I have utilized two different groups of weapon sets. So I do have 4 light Neutron Blaster 2s and I do have 3 light Electron Blaster 2s. Now I need to do this to be able to fit on the rest of the modules. Now remembering that we do get 10% bonus to our hybrid tracking speed per ship skill level for the Caldari destroyers, and that we do get 10% bonus to our hybrid turret optimal range, and our roll bonus, which is 50% to our small hybrid turret optimal range, which is allowing the Caldari state's Cormorant destroyer to have 100% optimal range once you have all of your skill levels trained to the max. Now the difference, you guys, between this destroyer and the Galente destroyer is that this one will track the smaller frigates better than the Catalyst. Now the Catalyst will shoot out further with null ammunition than this destroyer will, but this destroyer is designed to seek out and destroy those frigates by making sure that it does not miss a volley ever, and that each time it hits it is possibly penetrating or smashing its little target. So making sure that it has a smooth, clean delivery of destruction is pretty good. Now this version right here, you guys, is the shield brawling version. Now remember, you guys, that the destroyers for any faction should always be supported by a frigate, or they should be supporting a cruiser. So you should be using the frigates to lock them down, and the destroyer should be applying the heavy amount of damage, or vice versa versus a cruiser, where the cruiser will apply the heavier damage and then the destroyer will support the cruiser by by taking out any other of the small tackling frigates or any of the drones or things like that that are applying to the bigger target. This is why you see when you mainly look at any of the destroyer class ships in the game that you see that they have either a shield, armor, or structure style tank, which is 2 times more strength than a basic frigate. Sometimes they are 3 times as powerful, depending on which one you have chosen, whether it's a shield based one, an armor based one, or a structural based one. Now this is because you are meant to seek out and destroy frigate class ships. You are never supposed to go out and seek destroyer on destroyer class vessels, as remember you guys, in EVE Online it's a very situational game and that each ship has a specific role. Yes, you can go out and solo in any destroyer, but they are best to be utilized in what they are mainly meant to do, and that is to support either their smaller brethren friends when they have a target locked down, or to support their medium-sized friends when they are taking bombardment fire when they are locked down by a smaller target. Once you understand things like that and you realize that this is why the destroyers have 7 to 8 weapon systems and you see that the frigates have 3 to 4, because these things you guys are able to fight 2 versus 1 and sometimes 3 versus 1, as long as you make sure that these ships are fighting directly for what they are designed to destroy. Otherwise sometimes they can struggle winning the fight. So once you understand all these types of things, and yes, sometimes it can seem overwhelming, but you just slowly get used to it over time as you learn. So this is the shield brawling version. So because this destroyer from the Caldari state is more shield based in its natural attribute form, you guys can see right here that in the medium slots we have added a cruiser size medium azeotropic restrained shield extender, and we do have a 1MN afterburner and a J5 enduring warp scrambler. Now the reason why we add the cruiser size shield buffer on here is we do want to make sure that we do have enough hit points to withstand a few barrages and make sure that we can delete one of the frigates off the field, making sure that the DPS has been reduced significantly enough that the other frigate that we might possibly have engaged in a 2v1 now we know cannot kill us, and that we can finish it off by applying our heavy volleys into its tank. As you guys must take into account and remember that anything over 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 small weapon systems will nullify any small repping system. This includes small ancillary based armor reppers when you're talking weapon systems of 4, 5, 6, and higher. When it is the small based group weapon systems, these will start to affect the medium ancillary shield boosters, because the medium ancillary shield booster, when overheated, will rep as fast as some of the heavy small weapons that are firing. So because of that, you need a few more guns sometimes just to break them before they run out of their ancillary charges. Now, to make sure that we do not lose our hit points too fast, we have increased our resistances across the board with the damage control too, and we also have increased our damage application with both types of weapon systems with a magnetic field stabilizer too. And you guys, in our rig slots, when it comes to any of the shield based ships when they start out and you are building them, usually most of the time, I would say 80 to 90% of the time, they will be extremely low, have like maybe 10, 20, 30% resistances to the EM. So most of the time when you are going for a resistances based build towards anything that has to do with shield, whether that ship is either a shield active build or a shield buffer build, you will have to sacrifice 2 of the rig slots most of the time for EM shield reinforcers, and then you can choose which one to add after that. But most of the time as well, they are secondary weakness is thermal. So the most common addition to the rig slots would be 2 EM and 1 thermal. And when it comes to armor, you guys, most of the time it's completely reversed, so it'll be the same thing versus kinetic and EXP. Alright you guys, now if we simulate this build right here, you can see that we do have pretty average resistances across the board here when it comes to our shield resistance, and that we did pass the 2000 hit point mark, so that is pretty high when it comes to anything which is structure, armor, or shield for any destroyer or anything that has to do with small weapon based systems or small based modules. You want to exceed the 2000 2000 HP mark, then it starts to get really strong. So seeing that we have the 2000 here with average defense across the board does allow us to know that we will be able to do our job and take out 2 or 3 of the frigates with us before we go down in our small gang or fleet. Or if we are by ourselves, we know that we will be able to solo that 1v1 versus a frigate, and we will be able to win that 2v1 versus other frigates. But also remembering that all of that has to do with your piloting skill as well, and also versus your piloting skill of your enemy opponent, as you never really know what they might have. But when we look at the weapon-based systems here, you guys, and why I want you to see this and why I build a lot of my versions of ships in the game and a lot of the builds over time that we made before that have become meta, as the game evolves, you do have to evolve with it. So you have to change some of the things as you go along. Now, as solo PvPers, we like the ability to backpack that we'll get into later in other videos. You need to be able to change some of the modules on your build on the fly and carry them in your cargo hold so that when things change on the battlefield, you can adjust your playstyle with it just by docking for a moment, which saves you a lot of the time that you would have to go back to a station, get another ship, do all the jumps again, etc. So if you don't have the utility of having a station with all the modules for sale on standby close to you, or part of a corporation that has ships and things like that available to you, and you are a small gang and solo PvPer, and you do like to roam and you are far away from places like Jita, it is a good idea to use utility based things and tactics like this. For me to show you guys really fast what I mean by that is, when you look at the weapon systems here, what is the main problem when it comes to destroyers and frigates in the smaller class? And that is scram kiting, as this is an application based weapon system and it is part of the Caldari state, which are kings of the application field. You have to understand that a Tech 2 scram, you guys, reaches around 9 kilometers. So for them to reach any further than 9 kilometers, they do have to overheat their module to keep you pinned down. Now, reminding yourself that you cannot in the game keep modules overheated for very long, as they will eventually burn out. So making sure that you can reach past the 9 kilometer mark in your destroyer is a very good tactic to make sure that your longevity and your survivability against any of those scram kiters that think they can pin you down and outrange your weapon systems, you'll be able to push them off and force them away. So because of that tactic, we do have to always keep in mind of that when you're applying your weapons and choosing your build across the board. So because we split ourselves into 2 different weapon groups, and we have 3 electron blasters here and 4 neutron blasters, so that we can apply all of our modules and be able to apply a secondary class module, or what you guys would think of in any other MMO, which is second pages of builds that you could just swap to by docking up. So because of that, in our light neutron blaster 2s, we are able to reach out past the scram kiting range and force them off if they are trying to pin us down. And on top of that, you guys, if you are having trouble with, say, someone that is faster than you and he or she keeps getting away from you, then here is where our secondary builds will come into play, and they will utilize and help you. You just take off your afterburner like this, and you guys can see that when you take a micro warp drive engine and you just slap that on right here, you can now see that we've utilized perfectly our power grid, and it is at 0.0, and that we can now speed up and catch that target that keeps trying to get away. Being able to dock up and change our engine on the fly in this build makes it a pretty powerful aspect and a pretty good support DPS build for any small gang and any support fleet. Now, also by utilizing these 2 different based weapon systems, you guys, we are able to utilize the tracking aspect of this destroyer, meaning that when you are in range of any of these small frigates or any of these smaller base target vessels, they are just going to get chewed up by the tracking of this destroyer. And how you do this, you guys, is sometimes it's not always about the DPS. Sometimes you just need to make sure that every hit is above average and that it's never gonna miss. Now, how to achieve this is you make sure that you use the Caldari Navy antimatter charges. When I show you guys right here, you can see that the tracking here with the electron blasters is 683, and you can see that with the neutron blasters it's just under 600. Now you can increase this right here by taking off the damage increase module in the low slot and adding right here a tracking enhancer too, and that brings us to an incredible 750 tracking. This pretty much means that if you were to take the booster that also increases your tracking by 20%, that you are cracking almost the 1000 mark. There is no frigate in the game that is going to be able to scram and web you and orbit you in brawling position with this amount of tracking. You are just going to literally shred them apart, because they won't be able to use the traversal that they're going for versus your application, and it's actually working against them and helping you immensely for them to choose this raw brawl style of gameplay against you. So I hope you guys do see this, and I hope you guys do not be afraid as a Caldari state player to get out there and choose to brawl against all of these frigates in whichever one of these builds that you choose, and to understand that none of the destroyers are weak. Some of them will be weak against other destroyers, and some destroyers will feel like they are the best out of all of the destroyers, but when you use the ships for what they are actually specifically designed to do, whether they need the support of a specific module, then you can see that each one in its own right is super powerful and that none is better than the other. They are all just completely situational. Alright you guys, now that you've seen and understand how to utilize your two different weapon based systems and how to utilize your small based version of what we call backpacking in EVE Online, you can see that the Cormorant can hold its own when challenged and is very powerful in the hands and the skills of the right pilot, but this build does utilize and work best as long as you have a small frigate friend or another destroyer that is able to utilize a web and lock down the target for you. But you do always have to take into account that because of the high optimal range bonuses of this destroyer and the Caldari state tracking bonus from the ammunition, that you can switch to that really fast and manually pilot on the screen, allowing yourself to get hits even if they are webbing you down. But because the Caldari state is the kings of application, they should always be utilizing a web when they can. So because of that, we have builds like this. Alright, so we have here a controlled DPS application build, you guys. Now to understand what I mean by that is there is no faction in the game that will ever contest the application capabilities that the Caldari state has to offer. Once you truly understand this as a player in the game and understand that no faction will ever be able to contest the amount of DPS that the Galente faction can produce up close, and that no faction will be able to contest the speed and agility of the Minmatar faction, and that no faction in the game will be able to contest the long mid-range control and armor power of the Amar faction in the game. Once you realize all of these things, you guys, you start to understand that when I try to teach you guys that these guys are the kings of application, and that this build right here, you can utilize it in solo, small fleet, and fleet gameplay. Now what I want you guys to understand is that we still do have the 10% small hybrid turret tracking speed bonus, and we do have the 10% hybrid turret optimal range bonus, and we are using 7 light neutron blaster 2s. Now to make sure that none of these can turn off, if you guys are under heavy nuke pressure, make sure that you break up your weapon systems very fastly into groups of 2, so go 3-2-2 or go 4-3, and make sure that a set of your weapon systems are grouped off and you are not firing them. So that way your compact energy Nosferatu can acquire you the capacitor that is needed to be able to continuously fire your weapon systems, as usually it can keep 2 to 3 on. When you overheat it, it usually can keep 3 to 4 on. So remember that, you guys, that you are able to, with your engine off, keep a web scram and your NOS overheated, and keep some, if not most, of your weapon systems still activated. Now this build right here, you guys, is the basic web scram afterburner build, and we do in our low slots to make sure that we are sustaining against our survivability when we get into an engagement where it's us versus 2 frigates and we may be overwhelmed, that we do have our small ancillary armor repairer here, and that we are a complete structure tanked build on this one. Now having Combining the structure tank build with the armor repairer allows you to have heavy bleed effects at moments when you need it, and allows your armor repairer to catch up against the enemy barrages. Now, what I want you guys to understand when I say that this is a control DPS application build is that its optimal range is better than any of the other small based weapon system ships that you will come across. So as an example that I could give you is, say you were facing a Federation Navy comm. You have both switched to null ammunition as you are trying to utilize your range control. Now, because your optimal range will always be better than anyone you face as long as you are in this ship or any ship that has optimal range bonus, at max distance range that the weapons will fire, you will be able to apply your damage versus them at a higher base rate loss of DPS, as they may be grazing and missing as they are reaching out to the max range moment, even if these ships have a boost to their actual range distance that they can shoot. As another example I could give you would say the Catalyst, how it shoots further than this one, but this one will track better at the optimal range. So making sure that you understand that, and understand that when you face any other blaster based ship, that your range at their exact range, no matter what you're controlling it, whether it's up close, mid range, long range, so whether you've applied void ammunition, Caldari antimatter ammunition, or null ammunition for the range, you will always apply better than them. So that allows you to sneak in some pretty good wins and allows you to get some pretty amazing fights out of this ship as long as you stay true to what you're supposed to do, and that is to hunt frigates. You're not supposed to sit here and say that this ship is equal to another destroyer when its design role was never to fight a destroyer, but its design role was to pin down and fight another frigate. So when we do simulate this build right here, you guys, you can see that we are using a complete structure based tank. So just by having the damage control 2 down here, it gives us a clean 60% across the board with our other resistances on our hull base resistance. And then to add on to that buff, we add all of our rigs to small traversal bulkhead 2s, creating an entire based structure tanked build, and that we do have some based buffer before we hit our structure, and that is that this Caldari based destroyer is a shield based ship over a structure based ship. So most of the time people won't be expecting you to be structural tanked based, and that you do have an extra buff of 1000 HP here on the shield based ship. So that all works out pretty good to you, and that when you do put in full void ammunition and that you overheat it, you can see that you are pumping out 337 DPS and a clean 900 plus HP volley towards all of the small targets. And you guys, anything that does over 400 to 600 HP on any small target ship is incredibly powerful to them, and over time makes them bleed into their effects just after maybe 10, 15, 20 seconds. So once you know all that with this build, you guys, you do realize that this build is capable of sliding into any plexes in the factional warfare zones, and also is capable at defending inside the plexes in a factional warfare zone, as it can hover against the beacon, being ready to pin down any of its targets with the web scram. Alright, a lot of players believe at times that some of the Caldari state ships and vessels cannot be utilized in a solo based gameplay and solo PvP, but yes, all of the ships in the game, as long as you build them correctly to what the faction utilizes and what they can do best, any ship in the game can be utilized in solo PvP and solo roaming gameplay. You just have to make sure that you choose your fights correctly and that you make sure that you engage the proper targets. Once you take all of that into account, you will realize the next build that I'm going to show you guys, which utilizes the full state of the Caldari based building applications, and that build is this right here. Alright guys, this right here is a tanky destroyer, and this is the solo tracking application destroyer, because you still are utilizing your optimal range package with the ability to have that incredible tracking buff and being able to increase that tracking with a standard drop booster sometimes if needed. Means sometimes you do not need to have a webifier as long as you as a pilot understand what it is like to manually pilot your ship on the screen and to be able to manually pilot your ship into an angular traversal effect so that you will be able to track with your weapon systems. But because the Caldari state has this high base bonus with the weapon systems tracking, sometimes you just need to make sure that you are manually aiming directly at them on the screen like this. And that if they get underneath you, that you make sure you aim below them like this, while directly driving straight up on the screen. So that way, once they go down, you go up, allowing your shots to do critical if they hit properly, and most of the time they will. So when you understand things like that, sometimes it's not good as a player when you face a Cormorant destroyer to even pull away from it or try to go under or above it with your agility, as it may just be able to track you even better if it's set up properly, and after a few volleys it'll rip through any active tank that you have. As remember, these are just frigate and destroyer based buffers and active based repair modules, so it is very simple for any gun based ship to just be able to chew through those very easily. So in this build, you guys, you have to take into account everything that I just discussed and explained to you prior, as all of those tactics combined is what will make this a powerful utility based control application ship, whether you're going out as a solo PvPer and for a solo roam, or you're going out with your small gang friends, or you are going in a smaller base fleet. This ship itself does shine in any of those aspects as long as you utilize your tactics properly. So you can see that over here in the high slots, we are reaching out to make sure that we get max optimal range bonus with our 100% bonus at max ship skill level, and reminding ourselves that we get 50% bonus to our optimal range when our Caldari destroyer skills are at its highest, and that we do, as a roll bonus for the destroyer, get 50% more optimal range on top of that. So we are making sure that we use the heaviest based weapon systems that we can apply, and that we are getting our best optimal range out of it. And yes, we did add a small energy Nosferatu 2 on here. This is more powerful than the Gremlin and will allow us to sustain even more weapons active if we are under any kind of nuke pressure or any energy NOS pressure from our opponents. And in our medium rig slots here, you guys, we do have to use a smaller based afterburner, and we do have to use the lower based afterburner if you can, and you do have the implants, or you do have high engineering based skills and you can slip on a T2, go ahead and do that. But do make sure that you leave enough CPU and power grid available so that you can get your medium ancillary shield booster on there. And in our low slots, we are doing what I showed you prior in the previous build, that we are combining our damage control 2 here with 2 of our traversal bulkhead 2s over here, and that allows for bleed effects against our small ancillary armor repairer. And on top of that, you guys, in our rig slot, to make sure that we were able to attach all of these heavy base small weapon systems to the destroyer, and to make sure that we are able to attach the small NOS 2, we did have to acquire ourselves a small ancillary current router 2 as well. And to make sure, you guys, that in all of these style of ship builds that deal with the Cormorant, that you do have a standard drop exile booster in your cargo hold to make sure that you can, if you are being pinned down by the webs and a faster burning frigate than yourself, that you can apply even more tracking bonus by switching to your Caldari antimatter and then eating this booster right here, increasing your tracking to an almost incredible 1000, making sure that that frigate will get deleted. So I hope you guys do see that the Cormorant itself is very powerful, and it is a very good utility based destroyer ship for all small gang and fleet, and also it can be used for solo gameplay as well, as I am showing you guys here. But even though Caldari is the kings of application and up close close and personal control of the battlefield, while their long-range battleships and battle cruisers lay down heavy fire with their torpedoes or heavy-based missile systems, then sometimes you do have the players that like to support their friends from afar. So you do have the kiting and range style players in EVE Online, because sometimes you want to utilize speed and range over power of tank and up close control. You do have to utilize builds like this. Alright you guys, so here you have the ancillary shield booster kiting Cormorant for the Caldari state. Now this build right here wants to utilize its speed and its ability to be able to track its targets at long range while maintaining this speed. Yes, sometimes the volleys, the further you get away from the railguns, will be smaller base DPS than other application based weapon systems, but this steady stream of fire upon your opponents will slowly start to dwindle away at them, and then allow you to force them to burn some of their ancillary charges, or force them to have to burn some of their capacitor, because they have to start using their active modules to rep some of the damage that you have applied. Reminding yourselves, you guys, that in any kiting based ship, not just in this one, but in any kiting based ship in general, that you do not have to go in and tackle your opponent right away, that you may want to make sure that you apply a lot of damage before you go in and tackle them for the kill, so that way you can be sure that you aren't under any pressure and you'll be able to pull away in case any of their friends are coming at you as well. Now here in our high slots, you guys, we have added 7 125mm railgun 2s. Now we could add 150s, increasing our range and our damage output, but sadly they do track less than the 125s. Now what we are trying to accomplish in this build here is we want to make sure that every time we fire our weapon systems, whether it's a medium sized volley or a heavy DPS volley or a low DPS volley, depending on the type of ammunition that we have selected and loaded, that we are able to hit our target every single time, no matter what, even if the HP volley is a low hit, because we are at an extreme distance from them, around 40 to 50 kilometers. So being able to track them at high speeds and at far ranges is an incredible bonus to have on your side. So because of that, we have speed based medium slot modules. So right here we have one 5MN Y-T8 compact micro warp drive. Now these ones, you guys, why I put them on here is they need less CPU than most, so you are able to sneak on some other things. So in your builds, if you are needing more CPU and you do use a micro warp drive engine, go ahead and just switch it to a 5MN Y-T8 and you will see that you now have some extra CPU to play around in. And because this is a kiting vessel, you guys, we want to be able to reach out and be able to lock our target down. We might not be able to lock their engine down, but we want to be able to nullify their effect of warping off the field. So because of that, we do have a warp disruptor too, and we are using a medium ancillary shield booster. And that you guys know that out of any of the kiting vessel builds that we create and show you guys here, that I always like to have some way to heal some of my hit points actively, whether that's an armor repairer or a shield based repairer module. Now to make sure that we don't bleed out too much of our capacitor with our micro warp drive activated here and our low slots, I have added a Mark 1 capacitor power relay. If you do have the ability to use the Tech 2, go ahead and put it on there, because there is room for it in this build. Now remember, you guys, in this build we are mainly trying to keep distance at all times and track our opponents. That's why you do not see a damage control 2 on here, because your main goal is to avoid them at all costs, and if they are applying damage to you, then to quickly peel away in the opposite direction and switch to your long range ammunition, using your tracking enhancer 2 here to help you at your high speeds be able to track and apply your damage as you pull away. Now in case you get into moments like that, we do have 2 small traversal bulkhead 1s on here, which allows you to have minor bleed effects because of your medium ancillary shield booster. We also did add a small hybrid burst aerator 2 on here. What that's going to do is allow you to shoot your 125 railgun 2s even faster. Now you guys, you see in the rig slots here, if you needed more tank, you can go ahead and switch these, but because you make this a Tech 2, these ones have to be Tech 1 or you will have an overload in your rig slot. So if you go ahead and make these a Tech 2, you can make this Tech 1, giving you even more ability in your bleed effects. Alright, now if we simulate this build right here, you guys, you can see that we are able to lock out at an average 41 kilometers. So by utilizing that to our best ability, you can see that if we load our long range ammunition. Yes, our DPS volley of 205 HP will be low, but you can see that we do reach out further than we can currently lock. So we know that we will always be able to apply some kind of damage no matter what, whether we're heading towards our opponent or whether we're heading away from our opponent. Also knowing that our Warp Disruptor 2's base range lockdown is 24 kilometers and it's 29 kilometers overheated, but knowing that the base range is 24 kilometers, we can then apply our Caldari Navy antimatter charges, bringing us into a 21 kilometer range, allowing us to know that in the range of our Navy antimatter, once our target has become weak enough or our friends have locked it down so that we can now get closer without fear of losing our ship, and we know that the enemy's firepower has been reduced because of our friends, so we burn in closer and get ready to apply more damage without overheating our Warp Disruptor 2 with our Caldari Navy antimatter loaded, that we can stay at our medium DPS range with no threat at all. Alright you guys, now you do always know that I like to have cap stable style builds when it comes to any of the kiting ships that I choose to use. I do like to make sure that if I do not have an extra mid slot to be able to put in a capacitor booster, then I do make sure to utilize my slots correctly so that I will be able to remain cap stable when I do not have certain modules activated that I do not need. So I'm going to show you guys right here how to make sure you can keep this build and this version right here cap stable. And how you do that, you guys, is to make sure that you always have your Navy cap 50s loaded in your medium ancillary shield booster, and to make sure that you do not use your Warp Disruptor 2 when you do not need it. And yes, we are using all of the same weapons in the high slot here, 125mm railgun 2s, but if you look over here when it says it will deplete in 3 minutes, if I was pulling away from my enemy opponent and my enemy fleet or small gangs to recharge some of my cap or to reload my ancillary booster, or maybe I just need to pull away as I'm taking too much heavy fire and I have the speed to do it, and understanding that in this build we always want to be shooting our opponent no matter what until we leave our ability to target them with range. So because you always want to be dishing out some kind of DPS damage applying to your target with this tracking build here, what you do is you make sure that you turn your Warp Disruptor 2 off and that you make sure you just deactivate 3 of your railgun 2s. Your cap will start to recharge. Once you become stable again, just go ahead and turn them back on. Now if you guys do group your weapon systems into 4 and 3, you can just captivate your capacitor to be able to recharge itself and never go lower than that by doing volleys of 3 shots, turning it off and then turning it back on. That actually does nullify it and then make it so it becomes stable. But being able to dish out firepower for 3 minutes steady and being able to use your micro warp drive engine without having to turn it off is a pretty viable aspect in the games and the realm of kiting. So I hope you guys do understand and always remember that the most powerful ship in EVE Online, you guys, is always friendship. And yes, it can look like this thing is a little weak on its own, but it actually is very powerful because it never stops laying down a stream of damage towards your ship, whether it's light, medium, or heavy damage. It just is always being applied. And when you have 2 or 3 of these rolling around in a small group, it is very hard for any single or dual pilots to choose which one they're going to go after and tackle, as they are just constantly applying to anyone peeling in their direction. So I hope you guys do see that all of these styles of builds are powerful in their own way, and that you need to utilize your destroyers to hunt frigates, not destroyers in itself. Yes, you can fight destroyers versus destroyer, but some destroyers will just always outshine other destroyers because these things are designed to hunt frigates. Alright, I hope you guys do see the power and the utility of the Corax and the Cormorant from the Caldari state. And I hope that you as Caldari pilots get out there and utilize your support destroyers for your friends on the battlefield. And if you yourself have not flown or tested out a Caldari destroyer, then I would suggest that you go ahead and grab one of these builds and utilize it out on the low sec and factional warfare battlefield. But with that said, I hope you guys do enjoy the information that I have provided for you here. Please do like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.